The following program is brought to you in part by General Foods Corporation and in part by the Northwestern banks of the Twin Cities area.
Good evening. Tonight on More on Sunday, we bring you the year 1973. Some of you may have had enough of it already. Overall, it was not a good year. The environment went out and a new phenomenon called the energy crisis came in. The cost of living soared while wages sort of stumbled along. On the national scene, American combat in Vietnam came to an end and our POWs returned. An office building in Washington called the Watergate became a household word. And the man who vowed to make his name a household word, Spiro Agnew, became the first vice president ever to resign under pressure, sentenced to a suspended 3-year jail term and a $10,000 fine for income tax evasion. A former Michigan congressman, Gerald Ford, became the new vice president. Another Middle East war broke out. Tighter airport security led to but one hijacking attempt in the U.S. this year. That one was unsuccessful. And the U.S. Supreme Court issued decisions which legalized abortion, virtually eliminated capital punishment, strengthened police powers, and further clouded the question of what is and what is not pornography. But our program tonight is about what happened here in 1973 and what's likely to happen to us in 1974.
It's great to be home and be back in the United States.
Well, how long is it going to stay this way? How high is it going to go?
How much will you pay for it?
I'm not going to eat ground beef.
Not at all?
Not at that price.
The odds of a recession in 1974 are now 60-40. The fundamental reason for those odds being 60-40 in favor of recession is that there is a brutal energy shortage developing.
Oh, you win some and you lose some.
No, you've still got your 2 hostages, and we're still not going to jeopardize them, and they're still getting the airplane, and they're getting everything you want.
It was February 12th, and the first American POW off the plane at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines was Navy Captain Jeremiah Denton. Mrs. Wynn and her children have spent the last few years in Edina living with relatives. They and other Minnesota families have been glued to their television sets, watching for a glimpse of their POW. It's March 14th before the Wynn family gets a call from Clark Air Force Base and Brigadier General David Wynn, a call the children recorded.
Mary? Yes. Oh, my darling, I'm at Clark. I don't know what to say to you. Can you speak? Yes? Yes, I'll think of something to say. Hi, Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
One by one, from February on into April, they arrive. Air Force General David Wynn, Major David Everson, Air Force Major Roger Ingleson, Air Force Major Glendon Perkins, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Eugene Bolstad, Army Captain Richard Anschush, Navy Captain Cole Black, Navy Lieutenant Commander Robert Wheat, Army Spec 5 Gary Guggenberger, and Air Force Captain Daniel Mott and Major Richard Johnson.
Hip, hip! Hey! Hip, hip! Hey! Hip, hip! Hey!
Most are career men, and almost all have left Minnesota, gone on to military bases and schools around the country. A few former POWs have moved here, but of the original group, only Gary Guggenberger is left, living with his family in Cold Spring, Minnesota. But there are some for whom the waiting has not ended, and they want to know why.
We want to end this thing as much as the government or the people of the United States want to end hearing about it. We deserve an accounting.
The Minneapolis Grain Exchange, 9:30 in the morning. In 10 seconds, it's all over, and another new record for the price of wheat. Economically, it was that kind of year. Almost everything went up. Wages were up 4%, but the cost of living went up 7%. Food was up 20%, white bread up 5 cents a loaf, milk up 10 cents a half gallon, ground beef up 36 cents a pound.
I guess we're going to have to pay a little bit more to eat like we are, or else we're going to have to change our eating habits.
It was early spring. Beef prices were soaring and consumers were growing restless. A meat boycott was planned, and a group called FIT, Fight Inflation Together, even wrote a song to march into battle.
Every time we shop for meat, it still shocks us, and it's time that we insist, now we've had this nonsense right up to here. So to cross meat off our list, we'll buy meat substitutes till you hear our cry that all your meat today is thoroughly priced much, much too high.
It was a year of hot sellers. People who boycotted beef in the spring were busy stockpiling it in the fall before prices went even higher. People rediscovered the freezer. The energy crisis spurred the sales of compact cars, gas siphons, and firewood. Gasoline and heating oil were also in big demand when they were available. Meat was in such high demand that some people resurrected an old Western tradition, rustling. Cattle, chickens, hogs, if it could be eaten, somebody stole it. And business had other problems, too. Mushrooms were recalled 10 times. Tuna was second with 3 recalls, followed by almost everything else, from 6 million cars to frosted gingerbread men. Interest rates on savings were up a little, but not many people took advantage of it. Most were probably just trying to keep pace. And home mortgages were more expensive, if you could get them at all. About the only thing that didn't go up was the stock market. It dropped 170 points during the year, with the average share of common stock on the New York Exchange losing $13.37.
The economic outlook for 1974 is wrapped up in the energy crisis. Higher prices for Arab and other foreign oil will probably add 2 to 3% to the cost of living, which will mean a total cost of living increase of 7 to 9%. Food will go up, but only by the rate of inflation, not the 20% of 1973. Home mortgages are already easing, and that trend is likely to continue. Because of the energy crisis, we may look for a major economic slowdown in the first half of '74, but building up again during the second half.
It becomes not only my duty, but also my pleasure as your Secretary of State to call the members of the House of Representatives to order.
It is January 2nd, 1973, when a new and different state legislature is called into session. It's a DFL legislature, both houses for the first time ever. The legislators are younger, there are more minority members and women than ever before. This is the first part of the new split sessions of the legislature, instead of meeting just once every 2 years. And DFL control led to a blizzard of legislation, a bonus for veterans of the Vietnam War, a new state zoo in Dakota County, party designation and voter registration bills, the age of majority lowered to 18 for just about everything, including drinking, the omnibus tax bill, increased workmen's compensation, a limited right to strike for public employees, ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, environment and consumer bills. 3 major bills didn't pass: no-fault insurance, regulation of campaign financing and spending, and gun control.
The legislature reconvenes a week from Tuesday, January 15th, and it will pick up where it left off. Campaign ethics and financing, no-fault insurance, and gun control, all high on the list. And they'll deal with the energy crisis, mass transit, highway bonding, ban the can, prison reform, workmen's compensation, and the 1974 elections. Locally, the political action in '73 was in Minneapolis, starting with a downtown domed stadium that most of the politicians wanted and most of the people didn't.
They hold us in complete contempt and disdain, and we're becoming angrier and angry at representative government in this city.
The domed stadium eventually just died amidst political battles and a successful referendum that would let Minneapolis voters pass on any large bond. November was the city election, with incumbent Mayor Charles Stenvig the easy favorite. The Republicans put up council member Gladys Brooks.
We must stop this impasse that we have at the present time between the city council and the mayor's office.
But the real race was between Mayor Stenvig and the DFL candidate, former councilman, former chairman of the Metro Council, Al Hofstad.
I'm running for mayor because city government has got to be in touch with the people again. And I'm running for mayor because the time to save our city is running out.
We're gonna win it! Top to bottom! DFL! All the way! Come on now! Get 'em!
But it's unlikely that anyone anticipated the outcome. Nearly a clean sweep for the DFL. Hofstad as mayor and 11 of 13 council seats filled with DFLers. It was a stunning victory for the DFL, a surprising defeat for the Republicans and Mayor Stenvig.
There was a lot of cash against us, money. There was a lot of ink from the local paper against us, and the new discriminatory election law, of course.
On the last day of the year, Charles Stenvig resigned as mayor and took a temporary appointment as deputy chief of police. So January 2nd, 1974, it was mayor for a day, Richard Erdahl, who turned the city over to Al Hofstad.
And that you will well and faithfully perform and discharge the duties of said office for the term to which you've been elected to the best of your ability. So help you God.
I do. And that brings us to Al Austin and his Newsmakers of the Year award. Al?
Right, Dave. And to protect their secrecy, the winners' names have been kept in sealed envelopes in the vault where the White House tapes are guarded. We discovered 2 of the envelopes to be empty, but there are plenty of winners left. The Rip Van Winkle Award for Bureaucratic Vigilance goes to the Food and Drug Administration for the 2nd year running. After 7 years of study, the FDA in 1973 finally set regulations for the number of cherries that must be put into frozen cherry pies. Good work, man. Best political story of the year was about the Bloomington Republican Party's Executive Committee. That esteemed body banned Republican Councilman Clyde Allen from its meetings because Clyde Allen supported a school board candidate not endorsed by the committee, namely Mrs. Clyde Allen. News without news conferences would be like circuses without clowns. And undisputedly, the outstanding news conference of the year was held by Norm Selby of Minneapolis. As nominee to the Board of Estimate, Mr. Selby stood to hold the deciding vote on the downtown Dome Stadium. Following tense days of silence on the subject, Mr. Selby called a news conference to announce that he had at last made his decision. But then he refused to say what he decided. It was splendid. And now the year's grand prize for Best Quote of 1973, the Martha Mitchell How's That Again Traveling Trophy. And it's a tie. President Nixon wins half of it. Announcing that he'd stop tape recording private discussions in the White House, Mr. Nixon said that hereafter he'd rely on his own recollection of those discussions. That, he said, perhaps will be the more accurate record. And the other half of the trophy goes to the principal of Urbana, Ohio's high school, Fred Walter, who disqualified an unwed mother from running for homecoming queen. Because, explained Mr. Walter, only virgins can run for homecoming queen. Words to ring through the ages. Those are 73's winning newsmakers. On with 74.
The protest march and picketing continued to show great popularity in 1973, but it wasn't limited to the university. In fact, it wasn't limited at all.
We will overcome. We will overcome. We will overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I
On February 27, 1973, a small band of Indians, led by the American Indian Movement, took over the historic outpost of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. They were an odd assortment of young and old, men and women, armed with .22s and old shotguns, a few high-powered rifles. Someone said the Indians looked ready for an attack by jackrabbits. Wounded Knee was the site of the last battle of the Indian Wars. About 300 Indians were slaughtered.
What we've done here is that we've picked up all of Bigfoot's weapons and decided to continue the fight for him. They've lied to Bigfoot and they've lied to us. And I think that this is where we're going to take our stand and die at Wounded Knee.
They didn't die at Wounded Knee, although several persons were injured by the time the occupation ended 2 months later. On Tuesday, the leaders of the takeover will go on trial in federal district court in St. Paul. Others in the news, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the 36th President of the United States, died January 22, 1973, of a heart attack. He was 64 and the last surviving former president. Also, January 22nd, Minnesota's Commissioner of Corrections, David Fogel, announced his resignation from the Minnesota job to go to Illinois. One of Fogel's former assistants, Ken Schoen, became the commissioner. 3M and its board chairman, Harry Heltzer, pleaded guilty in October to making an illegal $30,000 contribution to President Nixon's re-election campaign. Heltzer was fined $500 and 3M fined $3,000. Dr. Malcolm Moose, president of the University of Minnesota, announced his retirement effective July 1, 1974. The University Board of Regents is looking for a replacement. John Boland, a DFL legislator from North St. Paul, was appointed chairman of the Metropolitan Council, succeeding Al Hofstede, who resigned to run for mayor of Minneapolis. Republican State Representative Gary Flackney was appointed Hennepin County Attorney, succeeding George Scott, who was appointed to the state Supreme Court. Ruby Hunt took over the presidency of the St. Paul City Council in March, following the forced resignation of Rosalie Butler. Councilwoman Butler says she'll oppose incumbent Mayor Larry Cohen for the top city job in the DFL primary in the spring. And Alpha Smaby, a 63-year-old former state legislator, lost in her bid for election to the NSP Board of Directors. Her candidacy was sponsored by CAPER, the Coalition to Advocate Public Utility Responsibility. The drama began on the evening of November 6th at a remote farmhouse near Wadena, Minnesota. Two jail escapees, John Morgan and Bill Wymans, held Elmer Wegscheid, his wife, and 5 children hostage. Police ringed the building. Morgan was already facing murder charges. WCCO talked to him by phone.
If any blood is let, it'll be that's the fault of the police. As far as the police are concerned, I'm never confident of anything.
The next day, local authorities and the FBI convinced the two to release 3 of the children. Negotiations continued, but at 6 the next morning, it was suddenly all over. The pair surrendered after the remaining 3 hostages had escaped during the night when Morgan and Wymans fell asleep. Motorists drove I-94 a bit nervously in May after sniper fire along the highway near downtown Minneapolis killed one motorist and injured another. Authorities picked up 2 juveniles the next day. The Minnesota Vikings rolled to a successful 1973 season, winning all 5 preseason games, 12-2 on the year, and beating Washington and then Dallas for the NFC Championship and a berth in the Super Bowl against Miami next week. The sex movie Deep Throat won Movie of the Year honors with the Minneapolis Police, being confiscated more times than any other film. The movie is still playing. And 3 world records were set in Minnesota this year. Bill Samuelson treaded water for 25 hours and 2 minutes. Dean Jantz and Dave Olson teeter-tottered their way into the record books by performing this nonsense for 204 hours, eclipsing the old mark by 4 hours. And a hand for all this absurdity from Bob Thompson and Tom Donahue, who, when last heard from, had already broken the old hand-clapping record of 14 hours and 6 minutes and were shooting for 19 hours and 25 minutes. On December 20th, fires swept through the 70-year-old Anthony Hotel in downtown Minneapolis. The 5-alarm blaze raged for 7 hours, completely destroying the building. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. Not the most serious, but certainly the most picturesque fire was at Pollution Controls Incorporated in Shakopee. The July 4th fire was virtually impossible to control, but the damage was minimal, since the drums which burned were to be incinerated anyway, although in a non-polluting manner.
It's September 18th. The nation's foremost authority on the health hazards of asbestos, Dr. Irving Selikoff, has come to Minneapolis to testify for the government in its trial against reserve mining.
It is my hope that we will not see a significant increase in cancer, but I don't think that my keeping my fingers crossed is a sufficient protection for the people of Duluth.
This is the government's first major attempt to stop a large industry from polluting. The questions: what are the health and ecological impacts of reserves discharge, and what can and should be done about them? Although the trial is more than 5 months old, they may not even be halfway toward determining the answers.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
Come on, everybody, let's hear it! You can trust your car to the man who wears the star, the big, bright Texaco star!
Nice day for a drive.
If you know where you're going.
For America, man, your car will love him and you will too.
In 1970, the environment came in as the big issue. In 1973, the environment was out, the energy crisis was in. The good old days of carefree driving and toasty homes were over. And while some people may have seen it coming, many were clearly taken by surprise.
We just won't have a gasoline problem in the fall and the winter. The next problem, if we have a problem next year, would start the same as it did this year, Memorial Day.
You expect more from Standard, and you get it.
And we've gotten more. Gas up 10 cents a gallon by the end of the year and still climbing when you can get it. They found that out in September. Hennepin County purchaser Sheldon Weinberg is opening bids for the county's gasoline and fuel oil.
There are no gasoline bids. There are no fuel oil bids.
In October, most Middle East countries stopped shipping oil to the U.S. The recently projected 10% oil shortage went up to 15%. November, and things are tough all over.
We have already made arrangements to lease a substantially smaller car, unfortunately.
If there is a subnormal winter, it will be nothing short of a disaster on petroleum supplies. I don't know what the answer is.
November 25th, President Nixon's message on the energy crisis. Thermostats down to 68 degrees, lights going off, or in the case of Christmas, never going on at all.
It might just turn out that darkness is a sign of enlightenment.
1973 was a preview year. The top story of 1974 will probably be the energy crisis. The days of abundant and relatively inexpensive energy are over. A great deal of money should go toward finding new sources of energy, from the sun, from nuclear power. Success will not come soon. Even without gas rationing, we'll find our mobility restricted, and some forms of recreation may simply become memories. Business and the economy will suffer. Unemployment will rise. How serious the situation becomes depends on how organized government is, how responsible government forces business to be, and the extent to which we're all willing to modify our way of life. Next week on More on Sunday, the story of how 460-pound Olympic medal winner Chris Taylor was turned into pro wrestling's version of a human bulldozer. We'll follow Taylor's progress from early training at Vern Gagne's wrestling farm to his debut last month at the Minneapolis Auditorium. Also, a special report on how one of Minnesota's largest corporations may be in danger
More on Sunday was brought to you in part by General Foods Corporation and in part by the Northwestern banks of the Twin Cities area.